Okay, thank you everyone for joining us for Native Lifeways and the Greenways. This is in collaboration with us, the Missouri Humanities Council with Great Rivers Greenway. And we're very excited about the series that we're going to present, just basically about what the Great Rivers Greenway is and how Missouri Humanities Native American Heritage is involved. Again, we just did introductions, and so the Missouri Humanities Council Native American Heritage Program is very new. We just launched last fall, and we continue to grow. Our mission is to support projects, programs, and initiatives that increase our understanding of the American Indian experience in Missouri through preservation, interpretation, and public programming. So some of our public programming, there's a little bit of history. We started out with one event with a video called Digidohi about the Cherokee Trail of Tears. And if you were able to make that, it was a wonderful event in person in Rolla. We had over 100 people attend, and it was very well received. And then, the pandemic happened, so we had to move everything to digital spaces online. So we appreciate you following us along as we continue to build our Native American Heritage Program. These are some examples of some of the program we've been able to do. Our first one there is in collaboration with one of our in-house programs, which is virtual Read from the Start. It was very fun to do. We had a Native person, Suzanne Jones, read this book, a Choctaw storyteller from the community, read this book by Kevin Noble Maillard. It was fun, and then I was also able to do a fry bread making demonstration. So this was an interactive storytelling experience that we hope to delve more into as we talk more about how food and culinary types of topics are engaging to our public and to our histories in Missouri as Native people. And the second one is a continuing ongoing program as we, move forward with not sure, in these spaces of not being sure about how we're going to, move back into public spaces or, keep it online. So we're just gonna keep it in both spaces, hopefully. And as we continue to grow, we are identifying different Native speakers on a wide range of topics. So the first few speakers we had talked about Native American heritage in a more of an in-depth timeline in Missouri from one of our speakers, Bureau people, Lindsay Manchek. And we continue with some upcoming programming that we're very excited about, which we'll talk about more later. So this is just a little bit of what we do at the Humanities Council. So I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly on the topic of Native Americans in Missouri. And this is because we're very excited to be bringing to you a Native Osage cultural person from the Osage Nation who will be going into depth about the cultural history and their indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing in and around St. Louis. We start this with just letting you know about land acknowledgements. I'm not sure if you know what they are, but I want to start out with a poll. I just remembered. I want to start out with a poll for you before we begin this part of the presentation. I am going to launch the poll now. And so, Missouri name origins. What tribal language does the state name Missouri come from? This is a multiple choice answer, so to your best knowledge, you can answer. Okay, we're all just about at 80% people answering. We'll wait till we only have a few more. Okay, I'm going to end polling. So I don't know if you can see the answers. Sue is the answer. So, okay, good job. I'm so glad that that one, because it shows that a lot of you know that the Siouan language is what Missouri comes from. However, some of these tribes are regional tribes in the Missouri Water Basin. So not Navajo. Navajo is Southwest. That was a way out there question. So thank you for that. Okay, so moving on to land acknowledgements. This is a way to, if you're not familiar with land acknowledgements, it's a way to honor Native American history wherever you're at. Native places and Native spaces, recognizing that the people who were here long before generations, centuries ago, were people who cultivated the land, lived with the land, and so we honor the history of these people by recognizing their valuable contributions and also recognizing, you know, they are still here today. Okay. Again, this is a very broad timeline. I'm going to take myself off the video so I can read this real quick to you. Okay, so pre-colonization, this is derived from the Booter Center's American Indian Tribes in Missouri timeline, and I'll leave this for you to peruse as a resource at the end of the presentation. It goes pretty basically in depth, but for those of you who really like to go more in depth, there's some articles and scholarly articles, and also some information about where this came from and where it was derived from. So pre-colonization, pre-contact, so from about 950 to 1050 AD, the Mississippian mound building culture emerged. So this means that, you know, I'm sure people are familiar with Cahokia, that is east of St. Louis. It was one of the largest indigenous cities north of Mexico. And I also wanted to say that I'm Navajo from the Southwest. And I know that there's stories from our people or our oral histories, and we also have our native names for the people who lived on the hills. So we had our words for, and I'm saying that because I wanted to say like how extravagant and how big and how developed Cahokia was. You know, people from my ancestors from the Southwest, you know, had names for this great city. Okay, so we continue to the 17th century into the St. Louis region. So in the 17th century, the area that is now St. Louis was occupied by the Illini Confederacy, the Cahokia, which is the descendants of the Osage people, excuse me about that, Kaskaskia, Michigamia, Moingwena, and Peoria. And in the 19th century, we have a few big events that happened, which is the Corps of Discovery and Indian removal. So in 1803, France sold what is now Missouri to the US as a part of the Louisiana Purchase. And then Lewis and Clark left St. Louis for the Pacific coast. And they encountered numerous other Missouri tribes that are also recognized and have their names from Missouri and the Mississippi River, which are the Missouris and the Otos. Okay, so Indian removal. So in 1808, the Osage Nation was forced to sign Session 67, which ceded 52.5 million acres of land in Missouri and Arkansas. So in exchange of this purchase or this, you know, forced signature, the government gave them $1,200 in cash and $1,500 in merchandise. And the present day Osage people are now in Osage County in Oklahoma. And they are one of the very few, I think, of maybe one or two tribes. They also have the biggest reservation in Oklahoma. In 1830, the Illini were forcibly removed, and after the passage of the Indian Removal Act, so this was widespread across the United States, the Indian Removal Act in 1830 stated that the several tribes were forced to move through Missouri. So that includes the Cherokee. I know a lot of people are familiar with the Cherokee Trail of Tears that comes through the southern part of Missouri, the Delaware, Kickapoo, Second Fox, and Shawnee. And then in 1881, the Oto-Missouri Nation were the last tribe forcibly moved from Missouri. Okay, so moving on to the 20th century, this is where a lot of St. Louis history starts to become more, structurally developed, and also with more of the events from the people who have colonized the region. So in 1904, the St. Louis World's Fair Louisiana Purchase Exhibition brought in hundreds of Native people from across the U.S. And you can see this how it was spread out and how it looked if you ever visit the Missouri History Museum. And then we have the Public Law 959 that caused thousands of Native people across America to relocate to St. Louis and other big cities. So people who didn't even live in the region were moved to these big, what we called them now, relocation cities. And then moving forward in some more of the history in St. Louis, the American Indian Center of Mid-America opened in 1974, and it was founded by the local natives in the area. And they offered like social, health, and cultural resources for natives, and it closed in 2007. Moving forward to the 21st century, in 2017, the Kansas City Council declared October 9th, 2017 to be Indigenous Peoples Day. I'm sure you've probably heard of and aware of across the nation a lot of states and cities and institutions have been renaming Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. In 2018, the City of St. Louis Board of Aldermen renamed Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day in perpetuity. And I forgot to mention, I apologize, if you have any questions throughout this, please ask those in the Q&A, and we'll have a time at the end to ask a few or to answer a few of your questions. Okay. So right now in St. Louis, we have a few organizations that are dedicated to Native American heritage and education and offering resources to people living in Missouri. So one of those, like I said, is the Missouri Humanities Council. We are the first Humanities Council to, let me turn my video back on. Okay, so we're the first Missouri Humanities Council to establish Native American heritage programming, which is a big deal. We have a lot that we want to work on statewide and also highlight nationally to people who want to hear about Native American heritage in this region. And from that, Missouri Humanities is a part of the Alliance for Native Programs and Initiatives. This is a new collaboration between several institutions in the St. Louis or state, regional and state area that aim to serve Native American populations in Missouri. And we hope as we work with them, we can continue to develop more programming for all Missourians to get more connected to the history of the state and the people who lived here. Okay, Elizabeth, to you.
Great, thank you. So for those of you who have not heard of Great Rivers Greenway before, we are a public agency created by voters in St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and St. Charles County back in the year 2000 to connect the region with a network of greenways. So when I say a greenway, I'm talking about an outdoor space that connects people and places. And could you take me to the next slide, please? Thank you. So there are 128 miles of greenways in the St. Louis region currently, and each one is unique and reflects the characteristics of the communities that it connects. Some go through parks, neighborhoods, waterways, business districts. They're all a little different. Next slide, please. So actually, I just a moment ago said there's 128 miles. That is because within the last couple of days, the newest section of the Greenway Greenway just opened up, increasing the mileage from 125 to 128. And annually, we have about 2 million visits on the Greenways each year. There's a lot of people coming back as part of daily, weekly, ongoing habits to practice healthy activities with friends, family, neighbors. And we work with over 250 partner organizations. None of this would be possible without the work of all of our different partners, businesses, nonprofits, community organizations, public agencies. They make all of this work to connect our region possible. We also have a number of volunteers contributing over 14,000 hours to help create these greenway spaces that conserve our land and water here in the region as well. Next slide, please. So in 2018, a group of people came together and created the Indigenous Interpretation Council. So these are folks who can help interpret the greenways through an Indigenous lens, connecting people to the resources along the greenways and sharing information about Native heritage in our region and the value that these greenways provide in terms of Native places and our connections to them today. Next slide, please. So many of the greenways in our region trace the waterways that form the foundation of our communities here in the St. Louis region. Our rivers and creeks throughout our region have long been used to transport people and goods. Additionally, just on the Mississippi River alone, 60% of all North American bird species make the round trip each year along the Mississippi Flyway migration route. And the waterways, wetlands, and woodlands along the river are important resting points for these migrating birds. 25% of all North American fish species live in this river, and there are 50 cities in the United States that get their water supply from this river. Next slide, please. So native plants that you'll see along greenways are very busy. They are constantly cycling nutrients back into the soil and providing the fundamental basis for all life on this planet. They're providing food and shelter for other organisms all throughout the food chain. And I should have mentioned earlier when I was talking about, what is a greenway? It's an outdoor space that connects people and places, and there are some common elements among the greenways. They typically all have a paved trail where you can walk, jog, ride a bike, use a wheelchair, push a stroller, just get some fresh air. They also have amenities like restrooms, drinking fountains, playgrounds. They have those neighborhood and community connections to unique destinations and special places. And they also have conservation spaces. So we are constantly working to restore prairie, woodland, wetland habitats along the greenways that celebrate our heritage here in the St. Louis region. These native habitats can provide food, water, fuel, fiber, and medicine. They help control floods, diseases, pests, and reduce climate change. And in functioning native ecosystems, water is filtered to remove pollutants, and plants are constantly being pollinated. These native habitats also bring people together culturally through recreational, education, and spiritual outdoor experiences. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start out talking about the prairie habitat. The prairies of North America are large, open areas of grassland that once covered more than 200 million acres. But today, less than 1% of that prairie habitat remains. Fortunately, you can see prairie being restored along several of the greenways in the St. Louis region. So if you look at this slide, that map on the left, the areas shown in red are where original prairie once grew. That image in the middle shows just how deep the roots of the prairie plants grow in comparison to what you see above the soil. And those roots are very important for storing carbon and preventing erosion and flooding. And then above ground, those parts of the plant are going to be providing food and shelter for the native wildlife. And you can see some examples of the flowering plants that are common to prairies. So prairie grasses have evolved to survive the harsh climates where they grow. Here in St. Louis, we're going to have bitter winters, long hot summers, strong winds, and the fires both challenge and ensure a prairie's ability to survive and thrive. So the roots of the prairie plants, as you can see, go deep into the ground and allow them to absorb water in times of drought. And then the leaves and stems of some of the prairie plants have hairy surfaces that deflect the sun and wind. And other leaves and stems are waxy or leather-like that shield them from water loss. And then the prairie plant buds are either at or below ground level so that they're protected from the fires that help keep woody plants in check and control invasive species. So you can stay on this slide and I'll just mention one other thing about prairies. So if you think about turf grass that we see all around us, that has very shallow roots, but those prairie grasses you saw has the deep, deep roots that soak up the storm water to prevent flooding. They're storing carbon and they're holding that soil in place. So another type of habitat that you might see along some of the greenways are the native woodlands. So the dense tangle of woodlands that you see in many places today are different than they were years ago. Today, the woodlands are much more densely packed with lots of invasive species in the understory. So clearing out the understory opens up the canopy and allows more native species to get rain and sunlight. Every part of the tree is benefiting the ecosystem that it's a part of. It's cleaning the air and water, providing food and shelter for a variety of native wildlife. And again, those roots are holding the soil in place and keeping it from eroding into waterways, which could negatively impact the aquatic life. Next slide, please. And another very important habitat along the greenways are our native wetlands. So native animals visit wetlands like humans visit a grocery store. The decaying plants in the wetlands feed small insects and fish that are then food for the larger fish and reptiles and amphibians, birds, mammals, all the way up the food chain. These wetlands can be filled with water some of the time or all of the time. So when you see a sponge soak up a liquid and then slowly squeeze it out, that's mimicking the way a wetland stores floodwaters and then releases the water into the ground. And by slowly releasing the water, that potential for damage from erosion is reduced. And it also creates a deep sponge of water for the plant roots to soak up during otherwise dry times. So as water moves around the plants in the wetland, the sediment in the water settles on the wetland floor, and the pollutants are dissolved in the water and absorbed by plant roots and microorganisms in the soil, so that by the time the water leaves the wetland, many of the pollutants have been filtered out by this process. All right, next slide, please. I'm going to talk about some of the practices and tools that we're able to use to restore these habitats. So starting out with prairies, the image on the left is from the Darden Greenway, where we did a prescribed burn on the prairie there earlier this year. So over the last few years, we have been restoring that area along the Greenway from a sod farm back into a prairie. So the fire that you can see in the images it was once a natural part of life for our native prairies, woodlands, and wetlands. And the native ecosystems in the Midwest depend on regular fires to restore nutrients and ensure their long-term survival. Without fire, invasive plants can take over native grasses and flowers and reduce both the plant and animal diversity. Low intensity fires, like the prescribed burns that we do, chemically convert nutrients in dead plant tissues in the soil surface so that it's more available and can improve the fertility of the soil. Next slide, please. So with wetlands, we want to protect what already exists. That's the first goal. And if that's, if a wetland has already been damaged, then we want to restore the natural processes in those native communities. So to protect what exists, these natural undisturbed wetlands are the result of a relationship that's been going on for thousands of years between water, soil, nutrients, plants, and animals. And when we're restoring these wetlands, it's important to think of the three key components of a wetland. So one is the supply of water near the surface that's there at least part of the time during the growing season. A second key component is the soil that can hold water near the surface for at least a portion of the year. And then third is the plants that are adapted to grow in wet soils. So when we're restoring wetlands, we might be, building up an area, digging it out, restoring stream flows, removing invasive species, adding new soil, and seeding with native plants that can grow in wetlands. Restoring a wetland to its original functionality can take anywhere from a few years to a few hundred years. The flood prevention benefits and bird habitat can be restored in a few years. The soils that are capable of filtering out pollutants and creating amphibian habitat take much, much longer. Next slide, please. So another practice that we do along many of the greenways is to stabilize the stream banks. We'll often use cuttings of the native black willow, take a stick that's about 2 to 3 feet long without any side branches, and root it into the soil. And then these grown willows have roots that grow deep and help stabilize the stream bank, keeping the soil in place. But then the willow trees are also growing out over the waterway and providing shade, so a cooler habitat for the aquatic life in the stream that needs cooler temperatures. There's also an image of a rock riffle. So this is kind of a row of rocks in a waterway that mimic a natural pool. So upstream, the water's going faster, and then downstream, there is more oxygen in the water because of the turbulence created. If you've ever been to a chain of rocks in the wintertime, you'll often see a lot of bald eagles that have stopped in the area. One of the main reasons they like it so much is because there is the chain of rocks right there where the water's going over and adding a lot more oxygen into the water, and so it's slowing the fish down. So that's just like easy food for those eagles. So that's also helping to in smaller waterways to stabilize the stream bank. You might also see what are called mesh socks. So these allow water to move through them while trapping the sediment and allowing plants to grow through the socks. And also, sometimes we're grading. So what was once a steep stream bank, we're able to make the slopes more gentle, gradual, so that the soil is less likely to erode in and have negative impacts on the aquatic life in the waterway. Next slide, please. Another important part of what we do along the greenways is to manage stormwater. So our goal is always to slow it down, spread it out, soak it up. We have a few different ways we can do that. There are amended soils that act like a sponge and can remove some of those pollutants. It's also important to, to be removing the debris from our waterways before it goes further downstream, because our waterways are what connect us all everywhere. It's important to remove it while it's still in your community before it heads downstream. So if you've been along any of our rivers and seen, lots and lots of plastic bottles, styrofoams, that's because, they often are coming from smaller waterways, which then that water is draining into a larger waterway and into our rivers, out into the ocean. So one thing to keep in mind is about these plastics, that microplastics are a very small piece of plastic that can pollute the environment. So when these larger plastic products are breaking down, they enter these native habitats, and it takes a long time for them to break down into very small pieces, but then they're ingested by organisms that exist throughout the food chains. And when it rains, all the water is pushing the plastic bottles and bags and styrofoam down the streets into our drains, and the openings of the curbs were designed to capture the rainwater and prevent flooding, but more and more trash is making its way from those drains into our creeks and rivers and flowing into the ocean. So it's, when we have the opportunity, it's always a good idea to pick up litter wherever you see it before it gets into our waterways. Next slide, please. So there are many ways that you can be involved. A lot of them have to, most of these are available during non-pandemic times when we're gathering in large groups, but we do still have some smaller group activities. One thing that you can help out with is removing invasive species. So Deer Creek Greenway example, there is a walking group from a number of local community organizations who are out there each weekend, walking the Greenway, having time interacting with each other, being social, getting exercise, but then also helping to remove the invasive bush honeysuckle along the banks of the Deer and Shady creeks along the Deer Creek Greenway. So after the invasive species are removed, the next step, next slide please, is to put native plants in their place. So the roots can continue to hold the soil in place. They can provide the food and shelter for the native wildlife and provide all the air, water cleaning benefits that native plants offer. So we also often have native planting volunteer opportunities as well. And then next slide, please. Debris removal that I mentioned, that's something you can do anytime you see something on the ground, picking it up. But we also do have organized volunteer opportunities, and the best way to find out about them is on our website, which we'll show later on. But while we are, many of us, still not going out and gathering in groups. Next slide, please. There are a number of ways that you can practice these conservation practices at home, and a lot of them are available on our website with some tips and guided support. You can watch videos that some of them are pretty humorous, talking about invasive species, but also giving you tips on planting native trees so that your own home can better support the native habitats in our region. Next slide, please. So a little bit of backstory about tonight's discussion is that Melody and I got together earlier this year and have been planning a series of walking tours on the Greenways, where we're going to be talking about Native American heritage and connection to waterways, the mounds, all the different conservation practices that you see along the Greenways. In reality, we're not yet sure whether those are going to be possible in August. We are monitoring current conditions and safety guidelines, and once we know if that's possible, we'll be sharing that registration information. But that's something that we hope to be able to do in the future, and hope that you will be able to join us. Next slide, please. Melody, did you want to add anything about the walking tours?
Yeah, we're very excited about it. We've connected it to 3 different waterways, and in relation to Native American heritage, we're hoping to have 3 different speakers talk about the history of the land in terms of probably an Osage speaker, and also someone talking about bees and pollination and how that related to Native people and how people lived in the land with the waterways. As you know, it's called Mound City, and it also has its history of, people who used the waters, with canoes for primary transportation. And we're really looking forward to that. I think it's going to be very fun. And also, a heads up, if this does happen, we have limited space, and we're just keeping track of everything that's happening, with the pandemic, and keeping everyone's health and safety, at the forefront. And also, just stay tuned with what we have for our digital events leading up to August.
Yeah, you have put together a wonderful Native American speaker series and ongoing programs. I know I've participated in a few of them and learned a whole lot. I'll also add that, in the last few months, we have seen usage of the Greenways increase significantly. A lot more people are out exploring, enjoying these outdoor spaces, and experiencing these native habitats and connecting with them. So we're very glad that more people are out there enjoying them. So at this point, are we ready for questions?
Yeah, let me stop. Okay, yeah, I am getting some questions about my volume. Sorry about that. I don't know how I've been having some problems with that before. I think this is the best I can do right now. Sorry about that.
Does anybody have any questions about any of the information we discussed tonight, or things you're thinking about and want to know more about?
Yeah, let me hold on one sec. I need to fix my. Yeah, I have a question. We have a question for you. What are your thoughts about where the Greenways are going in terms of other cultures or maybe heritage from the region? Have you done anything like that yet?
Yeah, so Greenways are an excellent opportunity to celebrate and interpret cultures who have ties to the lands where the Greenways are located. So there's a few different ways that we can do that. One is through basically what the Indigenous Interpretation Council has helped us to do is developing signs along the Greenways, sharing information about the culture of these groups along the Greenways, doing guided tours, kind of like what the Native Lifeways on the Greenways. We have been doing those for the last couple of years in communities all over the region, and putting together self-guided tours so that you can learn about it yourself and then visit the location and connect with this space as well. But yeah, the St. Louis region is a very multicultural region. And part of that is because we have the confluence of these waterways that have brought us all together. And so that is something certainly worth celebrating and telling these stories about. So if you're visiting any of the Greenways, I highly encourage you to read some of the information on the signs that you see out there. But then if you're curious about it, learn more. Go to resources like Missouri Humanities Council, History Museum, community organizations in that area that can better connect you with more information about those cultural groups.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, I have another question. What other online programs will you have in the future, especially about Indigenous tribes? I think for now that for the collaboration between both of us, it's what we talked about with the Great Rivers Greenways. Our next presentation will be in a few weeks in July, so just keep in touch on Missouri Humanities or Great Rivers Greenways for that one where we're going to have an Osage speaker. I in the planning stages with that person, and the information I've heard is just incredible to me. I'm still learning about the histories and people in the region, and I really enjoyed learning about that. But just a heads up, some of our programming with Missouri Humanities we have coming up is the Indigenous, oh my goodness, I just forgot it and I'm finding it. It's next Thursday at 7 o'clock again, and it's our talking about Indigenous futurisms. And what that means to Native people and Native arts. So we're connecting the arts and humanities to what that means for Native people. And we have a very well-renowned artist, she's an Anishinaabe, Maria Hutfield, who will be talking more of a discussion, not necessarily a presentation about what that means in the art field regarding Native people. And about Indigenous tribes, we also have some series in the works with our archaeologists, and also about Native foods that will be coming down the line. So again, stay tuned to our website and Facebook, and also the Alliance for Native Programs and Initiatives if you want to learn more about that. I would also encourage you to, Missouri Humanities has a new membership program that we just launched. And so this will give you special access and information to other things we are doing, including to our magazine that we publish, I think it's quarterly. And Elizabeth, can you answer anything for what your organization's doing?
Mostly through partnerships such as this one. We really try to partner with other community organizations who may have expertise to lend and tie that back to the Greenways. So I will just say from personal experience, I've participated in a few of the Native American Heritage programs with Missouri Humanities Council and found them to be excellent. And if that's something you're interested in, I highly encourage you to participate.
Okay, great, thanks. So I think we're gonna wrap it up here soon. So I have one more question. What is a website where the information you referenced earlier can be found? I think
maybe both of our websites were on the slide. So yours is mohumanities.org, mohumanities.org. Is that correct?
yes.
Great. And then ours is greatriversgreenway.org.
I'll put this in. So,
Thanks.
and what's yours?
greatriversgreenway.org. Our name is a bit of a tongue twister.
Okay, great. Do you have anything else you'd want to add tonight?
Just want to say thank you to everyone who participated. We really appreciate you spending your time with us, learning along with us, and thank you very much to Melody and the team at Missouri Humanities Council for partnering and bringing us all together.